On the morning of June 6, 1944, the largest military invasion in human history was unfolding on the beaches of Normandy. Thousands of Allied soldiers were dying in the surf. The sky was black with planes. The sea was red. And one man, a German general with the power to stop all of it, sat in his headquarters, watched the reports come in, and waited. He had the tanks. He had the order authority. He had everything he needed to crush the invasion before it ever reached the shore. He didn't move. Not because he was afraid, not because he was incompetent, but because of one man, one decision, made hours before that tied his hands completely. This is the story of the decision that may have cost Nazi Germany the entire war. And the man at the center of it has been quietly written out of the history. Most of us were taught his name was Fritz Bayerlein. And what happened to him on D-Day is one of the most devastating, maddening, and forgotten stories of World War II. If you've ever watched a D-Day documentary, you've heard the Allied side of the story. The heroism, the sacrifice, Omaha Beach, the paratroopers, Eisenhower's letter accepting full responsibility if it all failed. But the German side of that morning, almost nobody talks about it. And when you hear it, really hear it, it changes everything you thought you knew about why the Allies won. Here's something most people have never been told. The German military had a reserve force of Panzer tank divisions sitting within striking distance of Normandy on June 6. If those tanks had moved within the first few hours of the invasion, military historians believe the Allied forces, pinned down on the beaches, would have been decimated. I'm your host. Welcome to a story that should be in every history classroom in the world and somehow isn't. If this is your first time here, we tell the stories that history books quietly skip. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Let's go back to the weeks before June 6th, because to understand what happened that morning, you need to understand the argument, the bitter, catastrophic argument that had been tearing the German high command apart for months. To understand what's about to happen, you have to understand who Alexander actually was, the marble statue version, but the real one. He was charismatic to the point of being dangerous. He genuinely believed, that he was the son of a god. He drank heavily. He made impulsive decisions that brilliant generals called reckless, and then watched him somehow pull off anyway. He once burned an entire city to the ground, reportedly, because a woman dared him to at a party. He was brilliant, he was terrifying, and he was, above all else, irreplaceable. His generals knew this, every single one of them. There were men like Ptolemy, sharp, calculating, the kind of man who never acted without knowing exactly what he'd gain. He had been Alexander's friend since childhood, but friendship in the ancient world only went so far. There was Alexander's second-in-command, the man holding the royal signet ring when Alexander died, the man who thought that made him king. It did not make him king. There was a one-eyed general so physically enormous and so militarily ruthless that soldiers on the other side of the battlefield would reportedly lose confidence just seeing him approach. There was a Greek secretary, not even a Macedonian, who somehow ended up as one of the most gifted military commanders of the entire era, and who everyone looked down on right up until he started defeating them. These were not cartoon villains. These were men who had walked through deserts together, crossed the Hindu Kush mountains in winter, watched their friends die in India. They had built this empire with their own hands, and now, with Alexander gone, every single one of them believed, at least privately, that they deserved to lead it. Here's the detail that never makes it into documentaries. In the first hours after Alexander's death, his Macedonian infantry and his cavalry literally split into two armed factions inside the palace, both backing different successors, both ready to fight each other in the hallways of Babylon. It almost started a civil war before the body was buried. A compromise was reached barely. Alexander's unborn child and his half-brother, A man named Philip, who had a severe intellectual disability, would be declared co-kings. The generals would rule as regents. For about 5 minutes, that plan held. And then everything fell apart. It took less than 2 years. The man holding Alexander's ring, the man who believed he was the rightful regent of the empire, made one fatal mistake. He tried to marry into royalty to legitimize his power. The other generals saw it for exactly what it was, a grab. Ptolemy, already in Egypt and building something of his own, did something almost unthinkably bold. He stole Alexander's body. Alexander's funeral procession, a golden carriage, months in the making, built to carry the most famous corpse in the world from Babylon back to Macedonia, was hijacked mid-route. Ptolemy redirected it to Egypt, to Alexandria, the city Alexander himself had founded and never lived to see completed. The symbolism was not subtle. Whoever controlled Alexander's body controlled Alexander's legacy. Ptolemy understood that in the ancient world, marched his army into Egypt to take it back. He never came home. His own officers, up with a disastrous river-crossing attempt that got hundreds of men drowned or eaten by crocodiles, assassinated him in his tent. What followed was 2 decades of war so complex that historians still argue about the timeline. Alliances formed and broke within single seasons. Men who swore brotherhood on the graves of shared comrades marched armies against each other the following spring. Entire cities changed hands 3, 4, 5 times. Populations were enslaved. Farmland burned. Trade routes collapsed. But here's where the story gets darker, and almost no one talks about this part. The ones who suffered most weren't the generals. The ordinary people living inside this empire, the Egyptians, the Persians, the Babylonians, the Greeks who had been promised peace and prosperity under Alexander's grand unified vision. They became pawns. Their cities became bargaining chips. Their sons became soldiers in wars they had no stake in. During this period, the city of Babylon, of the oldest and most magnificent cities in human history, a city that had stood for over 1,000 years, began its final decline. The endless military campaigns drained its resources, disrupted its trade, and scattered its population. Within 2 centuries, it was essentially abandoned. The wars of the didn't just break Alexander's empire. They helped kill one of humanity's greatest cities. After the carving was complete, Ptolemy kept Egypt and built a dynasty that would last nearly 300 years, ending only when Cleopatra died and Rome absorbed the last remnant. Took the vast eastern territories, Mesopotamia, parts of India, and created a kingdom so enormous it was almost impossible to govern, and so it slowly crumbled. Controlled Macedonia and Greece, but his line died out within a generation. And the ordinary world, the world that Alexander had promised would be united, that would blend East and West Greek and Persian conqueror, and conquered into something entirely new. It never became what he dreamed. And here is the twist that most people completely miss. It also never went back to what it was. Greek language, Greek art, Greek philosophy, they spread across every one of these successor kingdoms. Persian and Egyptian and Babylonian ideas flowed back westward. A new hybrid culture emerged across the ancient world. Historians call it the Hellenistic Age. The man died, the idea survived. And here is the darkest truth of all the secret buried under centuries of hero worship and marble busts. Alexander's empire may never have been sustainable, not even if he had lived, not even if he had named an heir. The whole structure rested on one man's impossible personality, one man's ability to inspire, terrify, and hold together people who had nothing else in common. The moment he was gone, it was always going to burn. The question historians still argue about is whether he knew that, whether in some part of him, Alexander understood that he wasn't building something lasting. He was building a legend, And legends don't need to survive. They just need to be remembered.